Howdy nerds and nerdettes. I promised you guys a better episode this time around, so here we go. First things first though, just to get something off of my chest, as much as I appreciate the viewership on the last video, you're all a bunch of lunatics. I swear I thought the last video was the most boring video I'd ever produced. And yet it got 100 viewers more than the turret video did, which I'm not going to say distraught at, but it was also like I personally think the turret's a cooler project. But hey, whatever. If you're building this kit and you're getting good value out of this, by all means, no complaints over here. Well, a little complaint, but nothing too major here. I'm not too worried about it. Anyway, so one of my big frustrations with this kit is the main landing gear wheel well does not have any detail whatsoever. There is a mount point for the landing gear, and that's about it. Similar to the leading edge of the wing, there's just holes, right? These are like actual air intakes for functional purposes. There are metal grates over them on the actual aircraft. It's an easy thing to add. Well, relatively easy. It's time consuming, but it is easy. The landing gear wheel well was not easy, I will say that. But anyway, so I decided to scratch build all of this, and I really wanted to get a wing built up because I have some testing to do, which will be at the end of this video. So either stick around, or if you want to skip ahead, I'll put a little time marker, A in the description, B on the screen now, and you can jump to that point. Anyway, a lot of scratch building here. As part of the scratch building, I needed to take off the front mounting points for the Revell kit engines. The kit engines can be dressed up quite nicely. There's not a whole lot of detail on them. I don't personally like them, but they're not terrible. You could, in theory, get them dressed up nice, and maybe I'll do that in a future video. I'll kind of dress them up as best as I can and see how they compare to the engines I actually build, and will show in this episode. So anyway, scratch building. To get the contours right here, I basically used a cardstock and traced it out as nicely as possible, kind of estimated it, cut it, checked it, adjusted, whatever. It was a very long procedure. Eventually I got to a point where I had a landing gear bay that did fit the aircraft pretty well. Something I've considered doing, and some of you'll know this if you follow me on Instagram, I started a little GrabCAD link, and I'll put the link in the description for parts that I have 3D printed for this kit that I've designed and made. So like the engines, I did not design that, so I won't put that up there. But the radio sets that were in the fuselage in the previous episode, and some of the parts in this episode, I did design those based on pictures that I've seen and some research I did specifically for detailing these parts of the airplane. So I'll go ahead and link that in the description. Completely free. If you're doing this kind of thing and you want to go in this in depth, knock yourself out. I've also considered actually buying the kit again and just kind of really disassembling and destroying some of it. We call it destructive testing at work, but essentially slice it up so that I can make very accurate CAD models of kind of aftermarket parts. So instead of trial and error fitting a landing gear bay, you could just print one, if for those of you that have 3D printers, or it would have a template or something. I've considered doing that. If you're interested in me doing that in the future, indicate that to me somehow. Throw a comment, throw a like, whatever you want to do. But just give me some intonation that that's something you're interested in, because it's going to be a lot of work if I do it, and I'm not entirely sold on the idea yet, because I have no intention of ever building another Revell B-17. It's honestly kind of funny looking through the stash that I've got of how many different kit types there are. Like I've got a bunch of Tamiyas. I've never built a Tamiya kit. I have a ton of them in my stash. And the only thing I seem to build on this channel so far is Revell. With the HK exception that I'm doing now. That will change. I'm a little behind on some obligations I have. Again, this plane's not for me. So with some of the things I'm doing, I have to isolate the air intakes away from the rest of the internal structure of the wing, just to make sure that I don't have any kind of like light bleed through. And you'll see a little bit later what I'm talking about. And then I want to make them relatively dark behind the metal grating I'm going to put in, so that, there's no discernible feature back there. Not that there would be anyway, because the lighting going through those small holes is so dim. But I really want to make sure that you can't pick up any surface texture through that metal grate, and it's just completely obscured, completely isolated. The only thing you see is the metal grate, because in the aircraft, it's just ducting back there. We're ducting through to radiators, we're ducting through to different coolers, and different parts, functions of the aircraft that need external airflow. Here are the parts that I designed and 3D printed for the landing gear wheel well. So we have the air induction path, we have the exhaust channel, and we have an actual oil tank for the engine. Again, the landing gear wheel well on the B-17, as you're very aware if you've been paying any attention, is in the inboard engine nacelle. So immediately in front of it, we have this great big Wright 1820 9-cylinder radial engine. Radials go through oil like nobody's business. Like, they leak oil. It's a matter of standard procedure that they have to be turned over before startup to get all the oil out of the lower cylinders, otherwise they'll hydrolock. Have fun Googling that if you don't know the definition, because I'm not going to explain it here. But yeah, so you need a big oil tank next to each of these engines to hold all the oil they're going to need in flight, otherwise you oil starve them, and that's not a great thing. You do not continue flying for very long. And so that's actually in the landing gear wheel well at the side, and you'll see that in just a moment. First I'm doing the exhaust. Did it with a little bit of a burnt aluminum alclad, and then came back towards the end of it where the temperature starts to get a little lower, and just did straight airframe aluminum, and I kind of like the way it came out. I will likely just run over it with a brief wash when I'm going and detailing the rest of the aircraft. These are resin printed parts, so the standard Tamiya extra thin will not work to adhere them. Well, I guess it could, in theory, melt the kit plastic to the resin part, but it's really not a good idea because it's not going to affect the resin at all. So super glue is the way I went here. And I did come back later and just paint those the little straps that I've molded into the oil tank. I did paint them with a silver. I did that by hand afterwards because I wasn't thinking about it at this time. And then when I finally did catch up, I was like, oh, well, I can still access it, so let me go ahead and do it now. I'll also point out, I didn't really talk about it too much, but the turbo supercharger outlets where the exhaust would come out, on this model as it's molded, they're solid. There's no hole back there, and that's a really quick way to add a little bit more detail, is just to take a drill bit that's close in size and just run it through the middle carefully. Hollow it out. It looks like an exhaust now. Anyway, so fitting the exhaust channel on the outboard side of the main landing gear wheel well. And again, this is very visible, especially if your kit's mounted up. Anyway, so party piece here. I 3D printed and installed some electric motors into some Wright 1820 model engines. I did find them online. They were for 1 to 32nd scale, so I just rescaled them. And then, it's a quick Google find. If I do refind it, I'll put it in my link description for this video. I had to scale them back to 1 to 48 scale, and then scale them again to 95% of that, because when I initially printed them, they didn't fit into the engine cowlings very well. I found that the 95% fit did actually work. Despite being full of electrical and hydraulic lines, I thought it was probably best to keep a bright blue and bright red wire out of the main landing gear bay. That's just my personal thought. Your mileage may vary. So when I went ahead and 3D printed the induction line into the back of the engine that's visible at the top of the B-17's main landing gear bay, I figured, why not just go ahead and make it hollow? Yeah, so there's the finished bay. Immediately previously, you could see my former build when I did 909 a couple years ago, as I mentioned at the start of the video. And you can really see the difference between the, quote-unquote stock kit and my modified version. Now, I'm not done. When I do the landing gear struts themselves, I'm going to add a little bit more detail in here, some more wiring, more plumbing. I just really want to get the strut in. I have to do a little bit of modification, and that's around the actuator function for the strut. the actuator, or the actuating jack screw, if you will, that actually pushes the B-17's landing gear into the extended position or pulls it to the retracted position, isn't long enough to fit a correctly styled bay. So that'll be a simple fix. I'll get to that in one of the videos down the road once we're mating everything together. So here you can see one of the 1820s that I went ahead and resin printed, and I printed it out of a UV reactive filament, or UV reactive resin. Sorry, I'm used to FDM 3D printing still, and slowly transitioning to resin, as I've talked about during the turret video. But yeah, so really want to make sure I get a good coverage here, because anybody that walks past this with a UV light might get a weird surprise. And then kind of your standard alclad procedure. Looking at the 1820, I found that the cylinders themselves are typically black. The center of the crankcase, or in the crankcase, I don't know what to call it, kind of the dome at the end. I guess probably reduction gearing would be in there. Yeah, actually that's what it would be, the reduction gearbox. Anyway, the reduction gearbox is aluminum colored, and so are the heads. So carefully trying to just spray the aluminum alclad paint onto the heads, but of course without complex masking it's not gonna fully work, and so I did go back with a paintbrush and just touch up the regular cylinder heads. I will confess this is a different engine, because I did 2 test engines initially and then left one so I could make a short out of it or put it in a video later. So the one you just saw me paint was engine number 4. This is engine number 2. Engine number 3 is also painted, but it is not assembled. Anyway, so the 3D print did not come with the push rods. So again, it's a radial, it's an overhead valve engine. It relies on push rods from the crankshaft to go ahead and open and close those valves. So I needed to add push rods. So I'm just using some regular jeweler's wire. I got jeweler's wire that was already coated with a black kind of I guess it's like a plastic sheath. But anyway, it's black coated wire. Just trimmed it to length and slotted it in where each of the push rods would go. I drilled out the crankcase itself, because the crankcase has the holes where the push rods would be. So I went ahead and drilled those out, because that way I can be a little bit less precise with the cutting here and just kind of slip them into the crankcase a little bit. It also helps them adhere, which is nice. And then I just dabbed a little bit of super glue at the top of the head where the push rods would meet. The bigger challenge I had was actually with the ignition wiring. And so I opted to go for a copper color, because I've seen copper color on radial engines. Like there's a copper sheathing. I don't even know if it's actually copper, but it's the same color that goes around the ignition wiring. And the ignition wire goes kind of around it starts in the donut that goes around the reduction gearbox casing. You can see it when the engine's facing you. At some point we'll see it. Anyway, they can kind of see it there. So from there you have a wire going to the front spark plug, and there's a spark plug in the back. There's 2 spark plugs per cylinder for this engine. And so I used a 0.3 millimeter drill bit, which is tiny. What's that, 10,000ths of an inch roughly in diameter. So anyway, I used that to just carefully drill into that little donut where the ignition wiring would channel through. And I got a copper stranded electrical wire, and I took it apart and pulled strands out, and I literally pushed the strands into the holes I made. There you go. That's how it looks after I've attached all of them and glued them all in. It was very fiddly work, which is why I didn't record it. Also, the camera focus would have had to been perfect, and I'm still getting used. I got a new camera, by the way, and I'm still getting used to it, so I didn't want to tax myself that much. And so that's the final version. It looks pretty good. It looks great inside the aircraft, and when we get all built up, everything is going to look amazing, especially when I put it next to the 909 build I did, which I will do when I'm done. I'll either bring 909 home from work, or I'll take this one to my to my desk and put them side by side, and it'll be an interesting comparison. So I mentioned earlier that the B-17's leading edge intakes had metal FOD covers over them, like gratings, just to prevent anything large from going through. And so I got some basically like some sieve material, like a metal mesh, and just super glued that in. Really simple, makes a big difference. Here you can see my 909 build, there's just blank holes. And it really gives it just a little bit more detail when you're looking at the wing, and it's more visually satisfying, and when it's all painted up, it's going to look fantastic. Now, the eagle-eyed among you in previous parts will likely have seen several LEDs sitting around the aircraft. So, yes, the aircraft is going to have lights on board, so really the goal was to get landing lights installed, and I wanted the nav lights in each wing, and then lights throughout the interior, through the cockpit, and the various different sections of fuselage. So the landing light on the Revell kit is temperamental. At least it was when I built the Revell, when I built the 909. It was temperamental to get the transparency to fit, but we're gonna take a crack at it a little bit later as far as making sure it fits properly. For now, it's just some mirror chrome on the fitting, and we'll do some real careful detail work later. The nav light, the wing's too thin at that point to put an actual LED at the wingtip. I did attempt it, and it was not going to happen. Thankfully, I had some fiber optic lying around, so, casual rule with fiber optic, don't do what I just did to your eyes. You never ever want to look into the end of a fiber optic, especially if you don't know what the light going into the other end is. In this case, it's a relatively low power LED, so I know I'm okay, but it's a good practice to never do. The fiber optic just lies along the top surface of the wing, and I have it glued just inboard of a piece of clear sprue that I filed and sanded to a polished finish right at the wing tip. It provides a nice little lens for the nav light, so you can see it pretty well. The upper part of the inboard engine nacelle, I wanted to do some chipping in there, just because I did some chipping already in the landing gear bay parts that I've already built. And realistically, this is a high wear area, right? There's spinning wheels getting pulled up in here. They're exposed to the elements. There's a lot of maintenance going on in that area. There's oil tanks, tool scratches, whatnot. So a little bit of chipping, same strategy as always. Put down the aluminum paint, then put down the chipping fluid, then immediately put down the color, wait for it to dry, and then start just agitating it mechanically, and that'll give us a nice chipped finish. So you got a brief little shot of the end result of the main landing gear bay there. Here you can see the wiring. So you got the two engines, we've got the landing light, and the nav lights attached to the top wing in the back there. And so there's plenty of room in the wing. It's not an issue, except at the wing tips, but again, we overcame that. So realistically, once that was all done, went ahead and closed up the wing. There are several aligning tabs in the Revell model. Unfortunately, two of them are the actual engine nacelle and the engine mount plates, if you will, and they are now missing. So I had to be very, very careful putting the wing together. I also personally dislike the way that this molding goes together. The upper and the lower parts of the nacelles, the geometry is not quite right, and it doesn't give them a very good fit. If you're just going to glue it and forget about it, it's one of those you have to be extremely careful. And even then, there's going to be a gap, there's going to be some misalignment, and it's going to be a good amount of post-processing once the wing is actually glued together. So, if you're building this kit, be wary of putting the wing together. It is a challenge to get it right. Also, the nacelles and the engine cowl to the engine nacelle fit isn't very good either. There is a single tab to align the cowl to the nacelle, and it's clocked up at the 12 o'clock noon position. I don't think I've ever managed to get between the 909 build and the Memphis Belle build, I don't think I've ever managed to get any of those cowls to actually engage that feature. And so this kit, you know, I did take the faceplates off, but the locking geometry is, or the clocking geometry is still there. And it just would not engage it. And those cowls, or those engine nacelles, top to bottom piece, they're mated properly. They're as tight as they can go. And it still doesn't slip over and really engage that feature. So again, just be wary of that if you are building this kit. What I found was the best way was just to put a little bead of super glue, and you'll see it in a second. Put a little bit of super glue around the engine mount plate part of the wing on the nacelle side, and then as you sit the cowling over, it'll touch that edge. And so just again, be very careful of your alignment, very careful of the angles on it, and it does come out okay. Here, the leading edge of the wing, again, because there's only those 3 real locking tabs if you were to build this kit straight out of the box. Oh yeah, so you can see that I've been doing the engine mount super glue. Anyway, back to the leading edge. If you're building it straight out of the box with just the locking tabs, or the pin, you know, male and female pins, it's not enough to really get all the leading edges right. So go very slowly. Don't glue the whole section and then go press it together. And now you're running out of hands because there's this, you know, 12-inch long wing essentially that you have to somehow press together with 2 hands. Go slow, one section at a time, tape it, clamp it. I would say tape unless you've got a relatively weak spring clamp, just because there's no internal support there really other than the engine nacelle section. And so you don't want to end up crushing and cracking the plastic. So I would go tape and then just gradually work down the wing little by little. Don't do it all in one shot. The challenge with the landing that I was talking about earlier is actually due to the fit of the upper wing to the lower wing. So the lower wing has the molding in it for the landing light, and the upper wing mates to it, but there is a gap. So coming back and adjusting that is going to be a challenge, and I'm going to have to go really slowly now that there's an LED bulb in there and that it's already painted. Looking at the wing together, honestly, I'm a little bit obsessed with the way that the engines turned out. I'm really, really proud of the way those engines turned out and the way the ignition wiring is, and it's just such a vast improvement over the last time I built this kit, and it's really come together pretty well. So finally, we get to the fun part of this video, which is the finished wing, including the testing. So initially, I just ran straight power to it. It is going to be Arduino controlled, and I did spend a good amount of time coding for the test, so wanted to go ahead and do one engine startup at a time. You know, there you can see the nav light sitting inside the lens. Again, it's not super bright, but it works, and realistically the nav lights on the aircraft aren't as bright as the landing lights, so it works out. I really do like the way these engines turned out. It's really cool, and I haven't even decaled the props yet, and once I do, it's going to look even better. So here's us running off the Arduino for the first time with a full code. So I did test it starting the inboard and starting the outboard, and honestly it just looks really good. I'm super happy, and then overlaying it with the sound makes it even better. If you've stuck around with me this long, you know, thank you for being here. Thank you for watching all the video, and if you don't already, consider liking and subscribing. For those of you who are rejoining from the card I left at the start of the video, avoiding all the nitty-gritty details, welcome back. Similar, consider liking and subscribing, and enjoy just looking at the final product of the wing. It's very exciting. I can't wait to get it painted, and I can't wait to see the rivets that we went ahead and put into the surface really stand out, and all the panel linings stand out. I did have a discussion with someone on a previous video's comment section about how all the panels are lapped on the B-17, so really the HK kit isn't correct, and neither is the Revell kit, but you know, which one's more correct? It's up to you if you're building this. Anyway, catch you next time.